Jacob Reynolds sat at the small outdoor table, tapping his fingers impatiently on the edge of his coffee cup. He had just finished a long meeting with his tech team and needed a break. As a billionaire entrepreneur, he was always on the move, rarely taking time for himself. Today, he decided to enjoy a quiet meal away from his usual busy schedule. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city street, and the noise of passing cars seemed distant, almost peaceful. He ordered a grilled chicken sandwich, his usual comfort food, and leaned back in his chair, savoring the rare moment of calm. Jacob wasn't one for crowds. He preferred solitude, the kind where he could just eat his food in peace without the constant demands of his empire. But today, he felt like a small part of him was finally able to breathe. He hadn't had a day like this in ages, and for a brief moment, he let his guard down. The cafe was small and tucked away between two larger buildings, offering a charming view of the bustling city street. There were only a few customers sitting at nearby tables, enjoying their own meals or chatting with friends. Jacob liked it that way. Low-key, quiet. No one here cared about his millions or who he was. He could just be another guy enjoying a sandwich on a nice evening. He picked up his sandwich, ready to take the first bite when suddenly, a loud shout broke through the peaceful moment. "Don't eat that." It was a voice, a small one, coming from the street corner. Jacob froze, the sandwich halfway to his mouth. He looked around, confused, trying to locate the source of the voice. At first, he thought it was some kid messing around, but then he saw him, standing on the sidewalk just a few feet away. The boy was ragged, his clothes torn and covered in dirt. His hair was matted and unkempt, and he looked no older than 10. He wasn't holding anything, just standing there, staring directly at Jacob. His wide eyes were filled with a mix of fear and urgency, as if he had seen something that scared him deeply. For a moment, Jacob couldn't process what was happening. Who was this kid, and why was he shouting at him? But before he could react, the boy's voice rang out again, louder this time. "Don't eat that. It's not safe." The urgency in his voice was undeniable. People around them were starting to turn their heads, and a few even pulled out their phones, recording the bizarre scene. Jacob, who was not one to be easily rattled, put his sandwich down slowly, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What's the matter with the food?" he called out, his tone skeptical. He wasn't about to believe some random kid on the street, especially not when he had just ordered from one of the best cafes in the area. But the boy didn't respond immediately. He looked over his shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was watching him, then took a few cautious steps closer to Jacob's table. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw what happened in the back. The kitchen. The food is bad." The boy's voice trembled, but his eyes were intense. Jacob's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean bad?" he asked, now more interested than annoyed. The idea of someone tampering with food, especially in one of the places Jacob frequented, was hard to ignore. The boy hesitated, but then his eyes widened as if he realized he had to say more. "I saw one of the workers drop the chicken on the floor, and he just picked it up and put it on the grill like nothing happened. He didn't even clean it. I heard him say, 'Who cares? It's just for a rich guy.'" Jacob's stomach dropped. That didn't sound right. In that moment, all the peace he had felt just moments ago vanished. The boy was looking up at him now, waiting for some kind of reaction, his dirt-streaked face serious. The crowd around them was still watching, but Jacob barely noticed them. His mind was racing. Could the boy be telling the truth? Before he could respond, the cafe owner rushed out of the door, looking panicked. "Get away from him," the owner shouted, trying to push the boy off the sidewalk. But Jacob raised a hand, stopping him. "Wait," he said, his eyes never leaving the boy. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but demanding. The cafe owner froze, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. Jacob's suspicion only grew. Something wasn't right. Jacob sat back in his chair, still staring at the boy who had just shouted at him. The whole situation felt off, like something was wrong that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The boy, who looked no older than 10, stood there in front of him, his wide eyes never leaving Jacob's face. He was shaking, his clothes ragged and torn, his face covered in dirt. Despite his small size, there was a certain fierceness about the way he looked at Jacob. The cafe owner, a middle-aged man with a tired face, stepped forward, trying to shoo the boy away. "Hey, what do you think you're doing, causing trouble here?" he said, his voice sharp. He didn't seem to care that the kid was shouting about food safety. All he wanted was for things to go back to normal. But Jacob didn't let the owner push the boy away. Something about this kid's warning didn't sit right with him. The boy had been so certain, so urgent in his warning. Jacob could tell that whatever was happening, it was more than just some street kid trying to get attention. "Hold on," Jacob said, his voice firm. "Let's hear him out." He wasn't sure why he felt so strongly about this, but there was something about the situation that made him want to understand more. The cafe owner gave him a skeptical look but stepped back, clearly annoyed. The other patrons, who had been watching the scene unfold, were now murmuring among themselves. Some were still recording, others seemed just as confused as Jacob. The boy looked up at Jacob, his eyes wide and nervous, as if he wasn't sure if he should speak more. Jacob gave him a reassuring nod, trying to show that he wasn't mad, that he just wanted to know the truth. After a moment of silence, the boy spoke again, but this time his voice was quieter, almost a whisper. I saw them," the boy said, his words barely audible over the soft hum of the street. "The workers, in the back. One of them dropped some chicken on the floor, and then he just picked it up and threw it on the grill. He didn't clean it or anything. I think it was the chicken you just ordered. I heard him say, 'It's just for a rich guy. Who cares?'" Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the sandwich in front of him, the one he had been about to eat just moments ago. Could it really be? He had ordered it from one of the best cafes in the city, a place that he trusted. He couldn't believe what the boy was saying, but there was something in the way the boy spoke, something raw and honest, that made Jacob want to believe him. The boy wasn't looking for attention, wasn't trying to cause trouble. He seemed genuinely scared, as if speaking out like this was something he didn't do often. Jacob felt a sense of unease spread through him, his mind racing. If what the boy said was true, it meant the cafe had just served him contaminated food. That could have been dangerous, especially if he had eaten it. "Are you sure?" Jacob asked, his voice low. "Did you actually see it happen?" He wasn't accusing the boy, but he needed to know if the story held up. The boy nodded quickly, his eyes darting toward the cafe's back door. "I saw it with my own eyes. I know what I saw." Jacob was quiet for a moment, processing what he had just heard. He couldn't just let this slide. He had to know more. Without a word, he stood up, the chair scraping against the pavement as he pushed it back. The cafe owner looked at him, clearly irritated. "You can't just go around accusing people of things like that," the man said, but Jacob wasn't listening. He turned to the boy. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softer now. "Sammy," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Sammy, we're going to get this sorted out," Jacob said firmly. "I need you to show me exactly what you saw." Sammy nodded, his face still tense, but there was a small spark of trust in his eyes now. Jacob motioned for him to lead the way, and the boy hesitated for only a moment before walking toward the back of the cafe. Jacob followed him, his mind spinning. Was this really happening? How had he ended up here, about to investigate a food safety issue with a homeless boy who was shouting warnings at him on the street? It felt surreal. As they walked toward the back of the cafe, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Sammy led Jacob through a narrow alley behind the cafe, the air thick with the smell of food and grease. The sound of clattering pots and pans echoed from the kitchen as they approached the back door. The boy glanced around nervously, his small frame barely visible under the dim lights of the alley. He stopped just before the door, his hand hovering over the handle as if unsure whether to go any further. "This is it," Sammy muttered, his voice tight with anxiety. "This is where I saw it." Jacob took a deep breath and nodded, trying to steady his thoughts. He had no idea what he was about to walk into, but something told him he couldn't ignore this. He had been a successful entrepreneur for years, dealing with millions of dollars and high-stakes decisions. But this was different. This was about food safety, integrity, and something deeper than just money or business. It felt personal in a way he hadn't expected. He glanced at Sammy, who was still standing by the door, his eyes wide and alert, as if waiting for someone to catch them. Jacob didn't blame him. The boy was a street kid, likely used to staying out of sight. But today, he wasn't hiding. Today, he was the one who had the truth to share. "Are you sure about this?" Jacob asked quietly, his voice calm but serious. "I'm going to need you to be completely honest with me." Sammy nodded without hesitation. "I'm sure. I wouldn't say anything if I wasn't." Jacob gave him an encouraging smile and then pushed the door open slowly. The kitchen was warm, filled with the sound of sizzling food and the scent of freshly cooked dishes. The staff behind the counter barely glanced up as Jacob entered, too focused on their work to notice him, or so it seemed. The door swung shut behind him, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, Jacob and Sammy standing in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by busy chefs and cooks preparing food. Everything looked normal, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sammy pointed toward the far corner of the kitchen, where a large metal trash bin stood next to a prep station. "That's where it happened," Sammy said, his voice barely a whisper now. "One of the guys dropped the chicken right there. I saw him. He didn't even hesitate, just picked it up and put it straight onto the grill." Jacob's gaze followed the boy's finger, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the spot Sammy had mentioned. He couldn't see much from where he stood, but something in the way Sammy spoke made it hard to ignore. Jacob wasn't an expert in food safety, but he knew enough to understand that what the boy was describing wasn't normal. It wasn't just careless, it was dangerous. He turned to face the nearest chef, who was stirring something in a large pot, and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," Jacob said, his voice steady but firm. "Can you tell me who's in charge here?" The chef glanced up for a brief moment before returning to his work. "Boss is in the back. What do you need?" Jacob didn't like the tone, but he pushed forward. "I need to talk to him. It's important." The chef grunted, wiping his hands on his apron before he walked to the back of the kitchen, disappearing through a door that led deeper into the building. Sammy tugged at Jacob's sleeve, his eyes wide with worry. "Please don't let them find out I said anything," he pleaded in a hushed voice. "They'll be mad at me." Jacob gave him a reassuring nod. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, though inside, he was already formulating a plan. If what Sammy had seen was true, then things were about to get messy. A few minutes later, a tall man in a chef's coat appeared. His face was set in a stern expression, and he didn't look happy to see Jacob. "What's going on here?" the man asked, his voice low but sharp. Jacob straightened up, meeting the chef's gaze. "I've heard some troubling things about the food prep in this kitchen," he said, his tone calm but unwavering. "I'd like to know if you're aware of any issues with the safety standards here." The chef's eyes flickered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Everything's fine here. We're a top-rated cafe, mister. I don't know where you got your information, but there's nothing wrong with our kitchen." Jacob wasn't convinced. He didn't believe the chef's casual dismissal. "I was told that one of your workers dropped chicken on the floor and just put it on the grill without cleaning it. Is that true?" The chef's smile faltered, and for the first time, Jacob saw a flash of nervousness in his eyes. "That's not true," he said quickly, his voice rising a little. "People talk nonsense. If you want to know more, you can speak to my manager." But Jacob wasn't about to let it go that easily. He turned to Sammy, who was standing nearby, watching everything unfold with wide eyes. "Sammy, tell him what you saw," Jacob said, his voice firm but encouraging. The chef stood there, his face pale, trying to hide his nerves behind a forced smile. Sammy had just confirmed what Jacob had been afraid to believe. Something was seriously wrong in this kitchen. The chef's eyes darted around, looking for an escape or a way to change the topic, but Jacob wasn't going to let him off that easily. "You're telling me it's just a coincidence that the kid saw something and then comes to me with a warning?" Jacob's voice was steady, his tone calm but firm. He wasn't backing down now. He had to get to the truth, and he wasn't going to let anyone brush this off. The chef shifted on his feet, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know what that kid's talking about," he said quickly, his hands fidgeting with his apron. "Things get messy back here. Sometimes accidents happen, but we always fix them. We don't serve anything that's not safe. You're just making a big deal out of nothing." But Jacob wasn't convinced. "A big deal," he repeated, his eyes narrowing. "If you're serving food that's not safe, it's a huge deal. That could cause serious health problems for your customers. If Sammy hadn't said anything, I could have ended up eating that chicken. Do you realize how dangerous that is?" The chef didn't answer right away. His mouth opened, as if he wanted to say something, but then he stopped himself. It was clear that he wasn't as confident as he had been moments ago. Jacob took a deep breath and glanced over at Sammy, who was standing nervously off to the side, his hands wringing together. Jacob gave him a reassuring smile, trying to make the boy feel a little less scared. "You did the right thing, Sammy," Jacob said, his voice low. "Don't worry, you're not in trouble." Sammy gave a small nod, but he still looked uneasy. Jacob turned back to the chef, his expression hardening. "This isn't just about one bad kitchen mistake," he said. "If the health inspectors get involved, this place could be shut down, and you'll be in serious trouble for serving unsafe food to people. Do you want that?" The chef swallowed hard, his face growing red. He clearly hadn't thought things through. Jacob could see the panic starting to set in, but he wasn't interested in getting the chef into more trouble. He needed answers, and he needed to know that this wasn't just an isolated incident. "Look," Jacob said, taking a step closer to the chef. "I don't want to see this place ruined. I'm not here to cause chaos, but you need to get your kitchen in order. If you're cutting corners on food safety, you're putting everyone at risk, and that's not something I can ignore." The chef seemed to realize that Jacob wasn't going to back off. His shoulders slumped, and he sighed heavily, the fight going out of him. "Okay," he muttered. "You're right. We've had some issues here, but it's not what it looks like. Sometimes we get behind, and we don't always follow the rules like we should." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry. We've had some workers doing things they shouldn't, but I didn't know it was this bad." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean this bad? How long has this been going on?" The chef avoided Jacob's gaze, his eyes shifting around the kitchen, not meeting anyone's eyes. "A few months. We've been having some turnover, and some new people don't follow the safety protocols. It's been hard to keep up." His voice trailed off as if he realized he was admitting too much. Jacob's mind was racing now. A few months. This wasn't a small mistake. It was a pattern, one that had been allowed to continue because the staff hadn't been properly managed. He glanced over at Sammy, who was still standing quietly by the door, his eyes downcast. Jacob could see that this was more than just a matter of food safety for the boy. Sammy had been paying attention, had seen things that no one else had noticed. "What are you going to do about it?" Jacob asked, his voice now calm but firm. The chef's shoulders slumped, defeated. I don't know," he admitted. "We've got a lot of problems here. We can't afford to lose customers, but I also don't want to risk anyone's health." "You need to fix this," Jacob said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "It's not just about avoiding a lawsuit or keeping the cafe open. It's about doing the right thing. For the people who eat here, for the people who work here. If you're serious about turning this around, you need to take immediate action." There was a long silence. Sammy finally spoke, his voice quiet but determined. "He's right. You have to do better." The chef nodded, though he didn't seem entirely convinced. But Jacob could see the change in his eyes. The man wasn't going to lie anymore. There was a sense of responsibility there now, even if it came too late. "Okay," the chef said, his voice shaky but steady. "I'll call the health inspectors. I'll get the kitchen cleaned up. We'll make sure this never happens again." As Jacob walked out of the kitchen, Sammy by his side, the weight of the situation still lingered. The chef had promised to clean things up, but Jacob knew that words were easy. Actions, on the other hand, took time. He had no idea what would happen next, but he hoped that the cafe would actually follow through. Sammy, however, didn't seem concerned about that. The boy was more focused on something else, the food Jacob had promised him. They walked out into the sunlight, and Jacob could see Sammy glancing at him, his eyes full of uncertainty. "What now?" Sammy asked, his voice still small, but the tension in his shoulders had eased a bit since the confrontation in the kitchen. "Now we get something to eat," Jacob said with a smile. He wasn't sure how much the boy had eaten recently, but he could tell it hadn't been enough. Sammy's ribs were visible under his worn-out clothes, and his face was pale, like he hadn't seen a proper meal in a long time. Jacob wasn't about to let him go hungry now. They walked to a small diner down the street, a cozy place that Jacob knew had good food and a relaxed atmosphere. It was the kind of place where people weren't judged for what they looked like or where they came from. Just good food and good company. Jacob held the door open for Sammy, who hesitated for a moment before walking in. "Take a seat," Jacob said, pointing to a booth near the window. "I'll order for us." Sammy slid into the booth, his eyes scanning the menu but not really looking at it. Jacob ordered 2 burgers and fries at the counter, then brought the food back to the table. Sammy's eyes lit up as the steaming plate was set down in front of him. "This is all for me?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. It wasn't that Sammy had never seen a burger before. It was more that he didn't expect to be treated like this. It had been so long since anyone had shown him kindness without expecting something in return. "Yeah, all for you," Jacob said, smiling as he slid into the seat across from him. "Eat up. You earned it." Sammy didn't need to be told twice. He dug in with a hunger that surprised Jacob, eating quickly but with a kind of carefulness, as though he didn't want to be greedy. Jacob watched him for a few moments, the sight of the boy eating bringing a small sense of peace to his mind. He had made the right choice by helping him today. As Sammy finished his food, he leaned back in his seat, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked up at Jacob, a bit embarrassed but grateful. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I haven't eaten like that in I don't remember when." Jacob nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. "You don't have to thank me. You deserve it. More than anyone, actually." He paused, then added, "What's your story, Sammy? How did you end up on the streets?" The question caught Sammy off guard, and for a moment, he didn't answer. He stared down at his empty plate, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. Jacob didn't rush him. He knew this wasn't an easy thing to talk about. After a long silence, Sammy finally spoke. "My mom, she passed away when I was little," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "I had a dad, but he wasn't really there. He didn't take care of me. I ran away when I was about 6. I couldn't stand being with him anymore." Sammy's eyes were distant now, his words slow. "I've been on my own ever since. Sometimes I get by, sometimes I don't. But I try." Jacob listened quietly, his heart heavy. He knew that life had been hard for Sammy, but hearing it from the boy's own lips made it real in a way that was impossible to ignore. Sammy was just a kid, and yet he had been through more than most people would ever understand. "I'm sorry, Sammy," Jacob said softly. "That's a lot to carry by yourself." Sammy shrugged, his eyes downcast. It's not so bad. You get used to it. He looked back up at Jacob then, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. But today was different. Thanks to you, things are different. Jacob smiled back, his thoughts turning back to the cafe. He didn't know if things would truly change there, but for the first time, he felt like he had made a difference in someone's life. Helping Sammy today wasn't just about stopping a food safety issue. It was about giving the boy a chance to feel cared for, to know that someone noticed him. I'm glad I could help, Jacob said, pushing his empty plate aside. But you're not alone anymore, Sammy. If you ever need something, don't hesitate to reach out. Sammy looked up, his eyes bright with something he hadn't shown before. Hope. For the first time in a long while, it seemed like he had someone in his corner. I won't forget this, he said quietly. Jacob nodded, feeling the weight of the promise in Sammy's words. Whatever came next, he knew he had done the right thing today. Jacob didn't waste time after lunch. He knew there was still more to learn about what was really going on at that fancy cafe. The chef's nervous words kept echoing in his mind. Some workers doing things they shouldn't. That wasn't just about expired food. It sounded like something deeper, maybe even dangerous. Sammy walked beside him quietly as they made their way back toward the neighborhood near the cafe. The boy seemed more relaxed now, but Jacob noticed he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to be following them. You okay? Jacob asked gently. Sammy nodded, then hesitated. There's something I didn't tell you earlier. Jacob stopped walking. What is it? Sammy looked around before speaking, his voice low. I used to go to the back of that cafe sometimes, not to steal or anything, just to look for food they threw out. And one time, I saw something weird. Jacob raised an eyebrow. What kind of weird? There was a delivery truck, but it didn't have any labels or company name on it. And the boxes they were unloading didn't look like food boxes. They were sealed tight, like the kind you see in movies, you know. Like the kind people hide stuff in. Jacob frowned. You sure it wasn't just kitchen supplies? Sammy shook his head. No, I heard one of the workers say, hide it in the freezer. No one checks in there. And they were talking really quiet, like they didn't want anyone to hear. It was late at night, and I was behind the dumpster, so they didn't see me. Jacob took a deep breath. This was definitely more serious than expired chicken now. Something shady was happening behind the scenes, and if Sammy was right, it wasn't just about cutting corners. It could be illegal. Can you show me where the truck was? Jacob asked. Yeah, Sammy said, already turning to lead the way. They reached the alley behind the cafe. It was empty now, quiet except for the distant sounds of traffic and a bird or two. Sammy pointed to a spot near the back door. The truck stopped right there, he said. They opened that door and took the boxes inside. I saw one guy with a tattoo on his neck, some kind of snake or dragon. Jacob made a mental note. This wasn't something he could ignore anymore. If there were suspicious deliveries happening at this cafe, it could mean drugs, stolen goods, or who knows what else. It wasn't just a health code issue now. It could be criminal. Just then, a sound from inside the cafe made them both freeze. Someone was in there, even though the place was supposed to be closed for cleaning after the earlier scene. Jacob motioned for Sammy to stay behind him, and they moved quietly to the window near the back door. Peering inside, Jacob saw two men in the kitchen, not the chef, but different guys. They were moving fast, packing things into black bags. One of them pulled something out of the freezer and handed it to the other. Jacob's eyes widened. It was a metal box, small but heavy looking. Definitely not for food. He pulled back quickly. We need to go, he whispered to Sammy. Now. They moved quietly down the alley, not running but walking fast enough to get away without drawing attention. Once they were a safe distance away, Jacob pulled out his phone. Who are you calling? Sammy asked, his eyes wide. Someone who can help, Jacob replied. This isn't just about spoiled food anymore. This is something much bigger. As the phone rang, Jacob felt the weight of the moment. He had stumbled into something serious. And thanks to a homeless boy who had been brave enough to speak up, he might just be able to stop it before it got worse. Jacob didn't wait for the phone to ring more than twice. When his friend Liam picked up, Jacob went straight to the point. "Liam, I need a favor. It's serious." "What's going on?" Liam asked, his voice instantly alert. He had been a police officer for over a decade and knew Jacob well enough to trust him when he said something was serious. "Remember that cafe I told you about? The one where the homeless boy stopped me from eating bad food? There's more to it than just expired chicken. We saw two guys pulling a metal box from the freezer. It didn't look like anything a kitchen should have." Liam was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you now?" "A block away. I didn't want them to see us." "Good. Stay there. I'll send someone over to meet you. And Jacob, don't go back there. Okay?" "Got it." Jacob hung up and looked at Sammy, who had been standing quietly, watching the conversation. "The police are coming," Jacob said. "You did the right thing, Sammy. I know this isn't easy." Sammy nodded slowly, his expression serious. "Do you think they'll arrest those guys? If they're doing something illegal, yes. And you just helped make that happen." They waited on a nearby bench, staying out of sight, but close enough to see if anything changed. A few minutes later, an unmarked car pulled up. A plainclothes officer stepped out and introduced himself as Detective Harper. Jacob filled him in quickly, telling him everything they had seen and what Sammy had told him earlier about the delivery truck. Detective Harper took notes, asked a few more questions, then said, "We've had suspicions about that place for a while, but no solid proof. What you've told me might be the piece we needed." He radioed for backup, then turned to Sammy. "You were very brave to speak up," he said. "A lot of people wouldn't have." Sammy didn't say anything, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. Jacob gave his shoulder a gentle pat. Soon, two more cars arrived. The officers moved quickly and quietly, surrounding the cafe. Jacob and Sammy stayed back, watching from a distance. The front door was unlocked, and within minutes, the police were inside. A few moments later, they brought out the two men Jacob had seen earlier. Both looked angry and surprised, especially when one officer held up the metal box. Jacob couldn't hear what was being said, but he saw one man start shouting, pointing toward the back. It didn't matter. They were both handcuffed and led to the police cars. Detective Harper came back to where Jacob and Sammy waited. "You were right," he said. "There was something hidden inside that box. Not food. Definitely illegal. We're investigating the rest of the kitchen now." "What about the chef?" Jacob asked. "He didn't seem like he was part of it." "We'll question him too. If he wasn't involved, he'll be fine. But it looks like someone was using the cafe as a cover for something shady. Thanks to both of you, we stopped it." Jacob looked at Sammy, who was now watching the police cars drive away. For the first time in days, he looked like he could breathe a little easier. "You're a hero, you know," Jacob said. Sammy shrugged. "I just didn't want you to get sick." Jacob smiled. "Well, you did more than that. You helped stop something dangerous." As they stood there, watching the scene settle down, Jacob knew this was far from the end. But it was a good start, and for Sammy, it might just be the beginning of something better. 2 days later, Jacob found himself back at the same little diner where he and Sammy had eaten their first real meal together. The booth by the window was empty again, but today, it didn't stay that way for long. Sammy walked in, cleaner than before, wearing clothes that actually fit and didn't look like they had been worn for weeks straight. His hair was combed, and his face looked brighter, like he had finally slept properly. "Hey," Jacob said, standing up to greet him. "You look sharp." Sammy grinned. "They gave me new clothes at the shelter, and I got to take a shower. Finally." Jacob laughed and motioned for him to sit. "That's awesome. How are you feeling?" "Better." "A lot better," Sammy replied, looking around the diner. "This place feels different now. Like I'm not just sneaking in to use the bathroom. Jacob nodded. That's because you're not the same anymore. Things are changing. After the police raid at the cafe, everything had moved fast. The story made the local news. Jacob had been interviewed, but he kept the spotlight off Sammy as much as he could. He didn't want the boy dragged into the mess. Detective Harper had called to say they found illegal goods in the boxes, electronics, stolen from different states. The cafe was just a front. The chef turned out to be innocent, just a guy trying to keep his job while shady things happened behind his back. Jacob had also spoken to a friend who worked at a youth center. He explained Sammy's situation, and they agreed to take him in. They had food, a safe place to sleep, and even a small school program to help kids catch up on their education. They're teaching me how to use a computer, Sammy said proudly, picking at the fries Jacob ordered for him. I even made a little presentation about dogs yesterday. Got to stand in front of the group and everything. Jacob's smile widened. Look at you, already turning into a public speaker. Sammy chuckled. Yeah, but my hands were shaking the whole time. Doesn't matter. You did it. For a few minutes, they just sat there, enjoying the food and the peace. Jacob couldn't stop thinking about how one moment, a shout from a kid in the street, had led to all this. It was strange how life worked sometimes. One morning, one act of courage, and everything changed. Sammy took a bite of his burger and then looked up. Do you think maybe I could visit that cafe one day? Not to eat or anything, just to see it again. It feels like where everything started. Jacob thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, maybe one day, when it feels right. Sammy smiled again, softer this time. I just want to remember it for something good, not just the bad stuff. You already turned it into something good, Jacob said. You saved people, Sammy. You saw something wrong, and you spoke up. Most grown-ups don't even do that. The boy looked down, a little shy now, but he didn't argue. Jacob paid the bill, and they stepped outside together. The afternoon sun was warm, and people were walking past, busy with their own lives. Jacob watched Sammy as he stared out at the street, thoughtful. So, what's next for you? Jacob asked. Sammy shrugged, then grinned. I don't know, but I think it might be something cool. And in that moment, with the world wide open ahead of him, Jacob believed it too. Maybe things were finally going right. For both of them. And all because a boy once shouted, "Don't eat that."